Putting language assessment in its place. Language as evidence about people. It is natural reaction to hearing of reading any fragment of language. To use it as evidence about the person who produced it. When you speak on the telephone to people whom we have not met, we may use the sound of their voice, its accent and pitch, to give us clues about whether they are native speakers of our language, which region they come from, their gender, age, social class and profession, and their mood and attention. It seems that we can help forming an opinion about people according to the kind of language they produce in Britain surveys of customers of telephone call centers investigating attitudes towards accents shows that British people tend to associate American accent with high levels of success, Scottish accents with trustworthiness, and the accents of people who come from large cities such as London, Liverpool, and Birmingham with low levels of both. The Yorkshire Post 2006. This attitude may be unreasonable, but we are more likely to listen to the believed messages delivered by voice that we can find pleasing and trustworthy. Businesses now this and carefully choose actors with sustainable accents to deliver their advertising messages. If we receive letter of email from someone, we base similar judgments of their choice of words and written style. We may even begin to form ideas about their appearance and personality. As you read this, you are probably already building up a picture in your mind of the writer of this book. When you do this kind of thing, you are using the language that a person produced to make inferences or draw conclusions about them. Linguistic evidence can sometimes be used quite formally to give insights into a person's identity or personality. Experts in forensic linguistics often try to establish where a suspect comes from by studying his or her accent or speech patterns. Sometimes, employees look at the size and shape of job applicants' handwriting because this is supposed to give insights into their personalities. However, these kinds of inferences about people's regional origins or characteristics are not usually what is implied by the term language assessment. In this book, the focus is on assessments where knowledge about language, the ability to use language, or skill in applying these are measured or evaluated. In everyday life, we not only make judgments about people on the basis of how they use language, we also make judgments about the qualities of the language that they use. We notice when they make grammatical errors or choose an inappropriate word, when they appear impolite or overly formal, when they are very hesitant, when they are being unclear or imprecise, or, on the other hand, when they come to express their ideas particularly well, we also judge our own use of language. As we speak or write, we monitor and correct ourselves. We put right our sleeves of the tongue and fix our spelling mistakes, with or without the help of word processing software. We praise the things we say if people misunderstand us. We recognize our written text to try to make our ideas clearer to our readers. The nature of the knowledge, skills, and abilities involved in learning and using language is a matter of debate, and introduced to some of the contestations issues that have excited language assessment specialists is given in Part 3. Briefly, knowledge about language may include recognizing a people written in a foreign language and knowing a transition equivalent bird in language can be translated as in Arabic, in Chinese, or vowel in German, or knowing grammatic rules. The past participle in English, regular verbs is formed by adding ed to the stem look, or knowing pragmatic conventions. For example, in most circumstances, how are you, spoken by an acquaintance, is likely to be intended as a conventional greeting. The anticipated response might be good you, rather than details of the other's feelings or any medical conditions. A distinction is often made in language education following Hume's 1972 between knowledge of the rules governing language as a speaking system and the ability to actually use language in unrehearsed interaction. Learners may know a good deal about a language but be unable to access the word of phrases they know in the course of a conversation or be unable to pronounce them accurately. Conversely, many people are able to communicate effectively in a wide range of situations with little or no explicit knowledge of the systems of rules that govern the language they are using. Language skills involve drawing on language knowledge and language abilities in order to read, listen, write, speak, to interact with others, or to mediate between them. The evidence we have of a person using a language may be very limited. A few telephone conversations and a handful of emails perhaps, but based on what we observe in these few instances, we often make inferences about their more general knowledge of a language, their ability to use the language, and their skill in carrying out language-related tasks. We may hear them speak for just a few minutes, but reach conclusions such as Adele knows more Albanian than I do, or Bonita can get by in Bengali. We see a few examples of their writing and we make statements such as Coral can write very polished business letters in Chinese, or they find it real difficult to frame questions in Danish. The major focus of this book will be on the use of language assessment in educational contexts. This setting for language assessment is unusual in some important ways. Firstly, language teachers, unlike most of us, the actual expected to voice their judgments about other people's language use and are generally rewarded rather than resented for pointing out and correctly errors. If you have worked as a language teacher, you will probably have experience during the natural course of any lesson of deciding whether one of your students has produced accurate and appropriate language, and perhaps putting right mistakes they have made or asking them to try again. You have probably asked them to read or listen to a text in the foreign language and then ask them questions about it to check their understanding. As I find language assessment in this book, examples can range from informal classrooms activities to well-known national and international language tests, so his is a simple definition. Language assessments involves obtaining evidence to inform inferences about a person's language-related language skills or abilities. The evidence comes from the performance of tasks that involve the use of language. The inferences are what we interpret the performance to mean based on our beliefs about the nature of language and its role in the life of the person being assessed. The inferences we make about assesses. The term I will use in this book for the people being assessed are generally used to inform decisions that can range in magnitude from whether it would be better for them to use another comma in a sentence or practice saying a certain phrase again, to whether that should be give a job or permitted to make their home in a certain country. In language education, teacher training programs tend to give assessment rather little attention. Assessment is often the topic of just a few sessions, apparently an issue of little direct concern to the teacher, perhaps better left to expert specialists. On the other hand, it sometimes seems to take on overriding importance in the lives of teachers and learners. Many school children, if asked why they are learning a foreign language, would answer that they are doing it mainly to pass a public test, often known as an examination. Most language teachers spend a good deal of time assessing their students, and especially when the day of unimportant national examinations in getting close, many dedicate most of their classes to preparing their students to take this test. In this book, I argue that language assessment is inseparable from the teaching and learning of languages. This challenges the more traditional view in teacher education that assessment is a distinct activity, one that is marginal to the main business of the language teacher. In my view, teachers need to develop what is sometimes called assessment literacy. They not only need to understand something about how language assessment are made, scored, and interpreted by others, but also to be able to make, score, and interpret the results of useful assessments themselves. Experiences suggest that low levels of assessment Literacy can lead to bad education decisions and to teaching and learning that are less effective than they could be. Assessment and testing. The traditional view that is separated assessment from teaching may result from the identification of the word assessment with the narrower activity of testing. A test is an event that is especially set up to elicit a performance, usually within a predetermined time frame, for the purpose of making judgments about a person's knowledge, skills, or abilities. In the course of language, test the person being judged. The assesses a test taker, test, or candidate will respond to the prop. Example, an AC title question asked by an interviewer, a set of choices on a test paper. The test taker's response in judge or score according to a marked sim. This is a predetermined produce, such as identifying and calculating the proportion of correct answers. 14 out of 20, counting the number of errors in a piece of writing, assigning points or outcome is a score or grade, which is then formally recorded. The formalities and rituals of formal testing and the penalties associated with failure can make them an intimidating experience of the test taker. For some commentators, assessment of distinguish from testing because it covers a much broader cycle of activities. In addition to the test, even which involves electing or performance as evidence of language abilities. These activities include deciding on the content of the test, scoring the performance, deciding on the meaning of the scores obtained, decision that scores are used to justify, just as choosing with students to admit onto a course or deciding whether the award certificates. In this view, the test is just one step in a sequence of events which together make up a cycle of assessment. From another point of view, the word testing can refer to this entire cycle of assessment events, but tests are understood to make up a relative small set of control producers among a much broader range of options. Assessment is a more general term than testing and takes in many different methods of obtaining and evaluating language data, including less formal procedures with fewer controls and restrictions than tests. While it can be helpful to remind ourselves that assessment involves a whole cycle of interrelated activities, it is the second of these distinctions, the range of options for obtaining information, that is more often made in discussions of language assessment, and so is the one used in this book. It contrasts to tests. Other forms of assessment may involve such activities as informal questioning in class by teachers, semi-formal exercise and quizzes carried out in class, learners reflecting on their own use of language, self-assessment, learning judging each other's performance, peer assessment, the collection of samples of language that have not been elicited according to any fixed or formal plan. Examples of this include observations and some forms of portfolio assessment. Observations involve teachers watching and recording student performance in classroom activities. Portfolios are collection of students' work that may showcase their best achievements or represent progress over a period of time. Other approaches to assessment that do like tests involve specific props. Example, classroom exercises of the kind found in most textbooks may not be carried out under controlled conditions, such as set time constraints or curbs, or discussing answers with fellow students. Scores may not be formally recorded as evidence of the student's abilities. In fact, reporting does not need to involve the award of grades or scores at all, but may, for example, involve highlighting errors or giving descriptive commentaries on performance. It is important to understand that tests are not the only means of judging learners. Language, knowledge, skills, and abilities, and that not all language assessments are formal procedures that lead to scores or grades. On the contrary, most language assessments are informal, unobtrusive, involve no special arrangements, and do not cause particular anxiety or fear in the people who are being assessed. Assessment, teaching, and learning. There are a number of different strategies we can use when we learn a new skill from another person. Perhaps the simplest of these is imitation. One person, the learner, watches what another person does and then attempts it for him or herself. When animals learn skills, this generally appears to be how they do it. We know that some chimpanzees, for example, can learn how to carry out quiet, sophisticated tasks such as using stick as a tool to catch insects. By copying the actions of other members of their group, they carefully observe that what the skill chimpanzees does, recognizing that one set of action, such as chopping a stick, is related to another poking the stick into the tree trunk, and that these actions together bring a reward a mere of insects. They then try to recreate the same series of actions themselves to get the same reward. Chimpanzees that are very good at imitation, and they often perform better than humans in carrying out intricate imitation tasks. Assessment of this kind of learning can be straightforward, combining imitations with the process of trial and error. Learners either succeed in accomplishing the task or repeatedly fail and eventually give up. Although it is possible to build knowledge by observing and copying imitation, alone is a limited way of passing on skills, and the more complex the skill, the less effective imitation seems to be. A child can watch an adult driving a car and try to copy the movements she sees, but that will probably not make her a safe and effective driver when she has the chance to take the wheel. When learning a language, I can try to imitate the sound that speakers of that language make, to memorize words and grammatical patterns. But that is not likely to be enough to enable me to communicate effectively. Learning complex skills like this is much more effective if we understand something about why people perform certain action and how those actions help them to accomplish the task they want to carry out. This level of understanding is easier to achieve if we have another person to teach us. In order to teach, people need both to understand that others can do what they themselves can do, and to be motivated to pass on their own knowledge. When a person has mastered a new skills, they often share their newfound ability not only by inviting others to watch as they perform the skill or telling, explaining to the learners how to do it, but also by attending to the learners and judging how well they have understood and how close they are to be being able to carry out the task independently. Human learners do not usually simply imitate their teacher, but actively try to make sense of what they are learning, not only to notice that carrying out a sequence of action leads to a particular outcomes, but to understand why it does so. The teacher can support the learner by observing the learner's efforts and providing feedback, pointing out what they are doing well and what they are doing poorly in order to help them to improve. As humans, our willingness to teach each other in this way is one reason why we are so much more efficient than animals at preserving and developing our collective knowledge and technologies. Understanding the gap between what learners can do now and what they need to be able to do or understand in order to fulfill a task successfully requires a sophisticated awareness both of the task and the learner. In the case of language, learner, learners need to build an understanding of how people can use language to accomplish tasks such as establishing a rapport with another person, buying clothes, or getting their hair cut. Assessment that takes account of this requires more than simple judgments of success or failure, as well as having a good mastery of the skill herself and the ability to model the skill in ways that make it more accessible to the learner. The good teacher breaks down complex skills into the different elements that contribute to success. The teacher recognizes which of these the learners are able to do independent, which they can do with someone help or prompting, and which remains well beyond their abilities. The teacher may allow learners to carry out parts of a task that they are already able to accomplish, but offer help with the more challenging stages. Think of how a mother might help a child to assemble a model, cook a meal, letting the child carry out the task, but asking questions, pointing out mistakes, perhaps actually carrying out some of the most complex steps in the process herself before asking the child to try to replicate what she has done, giving feedback at the same time on what the child is doing well and how we might do better. Another way in which people learn new skills is through working together to solve problems. By acting as a team, people can do things that no individual member could do when acting alone. Think of terms of engineers or medical researchers developing innovative machinery or new treatments. The members of the group create new forms of knowledge by participating together in activities, and the relationships between them can be very important to the kinds of learning that will occur. This kind of collective social learning can be challenging to access, especially when using traditional tests, grades, and scores, because it is difficult to establish what contribution each group member has made to the outcome. In order to achieve better outcomes, members of the group may need to come to understand for themselves what aspects of the activity they might be able to carry out in different ways to achieve better results. Because assessment is used for a wide variety of purposes, it is quite easy to conceive of assessment taking place without teaching. One reason why many learners don't like public tests is that the test providers do not often give them any advice on which questions they answer correctly or incorrectly. The test teaches them nothing. On the other hand, it is almost impossible to imagine any form of teaching that does not involve assessment. Even in the most traditional classrooms based on a transmission model of teaching, which assumes that learning is mainly or wholly dependent on the teacher telling a group of students new information. The content of the lectures is intended to fill a gap between what the students are believed to know already and what they need to know in order to succeed. To be really effective as teachers, we need to find effective ways of assessing learners. We then need to use what we learn from assessment to decide on actions to take that will help learners to improve their knowledge of a language or their skills in using it. A major challenge for language educators is that the process of learning a second language is still rather poorly understood. Second Language Acquisition, or SLA. Researchers who investigate this process disagree about the fundamental mechanisms of language learning, and a number of competing theories can be found. See Cook 2008, Lightbone and Espada 2012, Mitchell et al. 2012. In assessing learners, we need to be clear about how we believe language our learner. What kinds of evidence we might be able to collect to show us what learners know about a language, what they are able to use the language to do, what they have difficulty with, and how we can help them to expand their abilities. Another troublesome issue in assessing language learning is the extent of disagreement about the purposes of learning languages. For some, languages should be taught in schools as a necessary basic skill, just as we need to learn arithmetic in order to operate in the modern world, shopping using banking service, checking out taxes, so we need foreign languages to do business and to interact with people from another countries. They are said to incoming benefits for countries which a linguistically adaptable labor force. For others, the primary benefit of learning languages has more to do with what Cook 2008 described as a brain training. Languages help us to develop our intelligence or adapt more flexible ways of thinking. Traditionally, a major purpose of learning languages was personal development through the understanding of classic works of literature and so becoming more cultured. What we choose to access will, of course, reflect what we think are the key purposes for language learning. People generally tend to believe that language assessment gives them pertinent information that can help them to make good decisions. If they are right, assessments may be useful tools that improve teaching and learning and serve society more generally. On the other hand, a lack of assessment information, poor information from badly convinced assessments, or even poorly understood information from well-convinced assessments may lead to regrettable decisions. Teaching and learning will suffer. Able people will be denied opportunities, and society will experience the negative effects. It is very important that we carry out language assessment as well as we can and use the results in a well-informed manner.